Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. The current time is 2 o'clock Central, so we will go ahead and get started. My name is Desmond Martin. I am Program Coordinator for NextWaveSTEM, and I will be your presenter today for another of our summer webinar series, Making Observations, where we talk a little bit more about using drones as scientific tools. I'm really excited to have you with us as we get another chance in our regular Tuesdays and Thursday webinar series to talk about ways in which we can support your students in remote learning. Something that we have all been doing more and more of in the past few months thanks to a global pandemic. I know that it has been rough. It's been rough for us here up in Chicago. It has been difficult for people all over, and especially for our educators. You're missing your classrooms, you're missing your students, and you still are working hard every day with your teams, with your other teachers, with your administrations in order to make learning real and accessible for your students. We want to say we appreciate you. We're thankful for the work that you continuously do. And part of the way that we want to show that appreciation is with our webinar series over the course of the summer. So before I get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. First, there are a few of us who are on before we got started, but first we are in webinar mode today. That means that as much as we love to see how camera ready you are and how good those speaking voices are, your mics and your cameras will not be available for our webinar today. So if you're worried, don't worry. But that does not mean you're voiceless. The Q&A functionality in Zoom and the chat functionality are on. So that means that if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, if you have any comments, you are more than free to jump in the chat and let me know. I'm monitoring the chat live. My colleague, Segundi Chigani, is online. She's a part of our school partnerships team, and she is also monitoring the chat so that just in case I miss something, she'll be able to direct your question and we'll make sure to get that question answered. The second thing is for our Illinois educators. Those of us who are local to Illinois, NextWaveSTEM is based out of Chicago. Today's webinar is a PD hour. That means that you will receive a certificate at the end of the webinar session today that you are able to turn in ISB and claim that hour. Those of us who are out of state, we currently don't have those professional development partnerships out of state yet. However, all of our partners today will be receiving that certificate. So if you need to prove that you were in our PD session today, you can do that as well. With all of that being said, we will go ahead and we will press forward because we've got a decent amount to cover, but we want to make sure that we give you plenty of time to ask any questions that you might have and get some questions answered too. So a great place to begin, and if you've been with us before, you've probably memorized this portion by now, is at the beginning. NextWaveSTEM was founded about 3 years ago with the goal of empowering a future generation of young STEM learners. Something that's really important to us is recognizing that they are massive problems that not only our country, but our world is facing that we believe we won't get the answers to without a future generation of scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians. And even more than that, because we started out as a company that was really focused on educating the students directly with our own instructors, we learned more and more that the most important part of that system are you, our educators. So NextWaveSTEM, we've seen tremendous growth and transition in what we do from just offering our emerging technology courses directly to students to actually making that curricula something that you as an educator can access through licensing the curricula. And we've grown more and more to become an all-in-one solution. So if you're looking for curricula, if you're looking for training in that curricula and in the emerging technologies that we use and that you might be using in the classroom already, if you're looking for the equipment, if you're building from the ground up and you need robots, drones, 3D printers in order to grow more and more in your STEM offerings at your school. NextWave STEM is there for you. More than anything, it's really important for us to empower teachers of today to prepare the students for the future. And that's going to be preparing them for a future that they can't quite even imagine yet. So the more flexibility they have, the more tools and skill sets that you have as an educator to prepare the next generation of students, the better. We really believe in you at NextWave STEM, and we know that you can do it. So for today's webinar, we actually have 3 goals. We'll have a chance to get a little bit interactive towards the middle because we've got some questions. Well, a question that we love to get your input on. But the first is we want to learn how to use the sensors of a drone to collect data. Don't worry, that sounds really specific. That sounds kind of wonky. We'll do a little bit of an overview first, and then we'll talk about our actual drone. And we'll talk about the ways in which we can use sensors in the drone to collect data generally, not as technical as you might think at all. The second thing is that we want to explore assumptions that are inherent in drone technology in the scientific method. That's actually going to be a little fun. Many of us may be very familiar with the scientific method, especially if we're in schools and school districts that participate in the science fair. Scientific method is something that we've been teaching for decades, and we'll have a little bit of a discussion about its efficacy and how we can use drones in the scientific method if we want to use drones in the scientific method. And then the third thing we're going to do is talk about ways that we can create equity in drone uses for students who are going to be remote learners. That's going to be something that I'm sure many of us are going to wonder about. What can my students do with drones if they're working at distance and they may not physically have access to a drone or may not even have access to a drone with these sensors? What can we do? We'll touch on that a little bit as well. Now I'm excitable. Let me give you this warning. I am excitable. When I get excited, I can speak pretty quickly. And that's something that can make it kind of hard sometimes for people to understand what I'm saying. If I get out ahead of myself, let me know. Jump in the comments, ask me to slow down, to repeat something. That's not a problem at all. But if you do miss something, you don't have to worry about that either. After today's webinar, we will be making the recording available to you. We are recording today's session, and we're also going to be making the PowerPoint presentation that I'm using for today's webinar available to you as well. So we're hoping that even if you do miss a beat someplace, if you got to step away, no worries, we'll make sure that you get that recording. So with all of that now being said, we'll press on forward. So the first thing I want to do is actually explore our drone. We think about drones as being this really advanced piece of technology, and in many ways it is. It's helpful for us to understand the specific drone that we use at NextWave STEM, the specific drone that your students may end up using, why we use this drone, how it becomes really helpful for us, and ways in which you can engage the drone for scientific inquiry. Which is what the scientific method and some other teaching methodologies are all about. So before I talk about the physical drone, I want to talk about the way in which we interact with that drone, the way that we control that drone. At NextWave STEM, we use the Tello EDU drone made by DJI. The Tello EDU drone is controlled via the Tello EDU app. That app is something that's bot-based coding. That means that we can fly our drones autonomously. Kind of reaching off camera here a bit. I've got an actual example of the Tello drone in my hand. You might not be able to see it as large on your screen as my presentation right now, but the Tello EDU drone is a drone that's not only traditionally flown with a remote control, but can be programmed to fly using code. And that code is block-based drag and drop code. We're big fans of that at NextWave STEM. because it's really important for us to not keep students out of learning about drones and learning about flying drones and learning how to fly drones with code just because they've never done any kind of hardcore coding before. With block-based coding, it is possible for students to get in, get the drone flying in the air, make it fly by itself, and they don't have to worry about whether or not they're missing a semicolon or if they spelled something wrong. They are completely using their fingers to touch, drag and drop, and are able to fly their drones that way. So that's really, really positive for us. The second thing we really love about the Tello EDU app, something we'll talk about a little bit later as well, is the fact that it allows us to simulate flights. Tello EDU is extremely powerful in that way. We can create simulations to test our hypotheses about what our code is going to do with our drone, but we can also use simulation for our students who are at distance and might not have access to all the equipment all the time. One thing that we're going to talk about really much more immediately is the fact that the drone gives us live sensor outputs. We'll talk more about those sensors and how they're useful, but more than anything, it's widely accessible. It's available for iOS and Android. It's free. Your students don't have to pay a dime. You as an instructor don't have to pay a dime to have access to the software. And the software also runs on Chromebooks as well. That means that there's many, many platforms with which we can access our actual software to control our drones. We're big fans of accessibility. Now that I've talked a little bit about the software, I'd love to talk more about the hardware. I know I just showed this guy in front of my face, the Tello EDU drone. Looking at our presentation, we get a little bit more information about our drone. The drone weighs about 80 grams. That's about 2.8 ounces. That's really useful information. One, just because you can kind of be a nerd and say, I know exactly how heavy my drone is, but it's also important because we have to consider federal regulations when it comes to drones. Drones that are 9.8 ounces or heavier need to be registered with the federal government. That registration is not onerous. There is a small fee involved, but it kind of makes sense that we want to register larger drones. If we fly drones in restricted areas, say like within 5 miles of an airport, or if there's some kind of accident, or if we just need the drones to get into areas, or if we need the drones to stay out of areas where they shouldn't be and they were covered. A larger drone has the ability to do some damage, and it's important for us and for law enforcement and for the authorities to be able to locate the owner of that drone. That's why they should be registered. With a drone this small, we don't have to worry about that. You're in the clear. You can fly them inside of your school. They fly really, really well indoors. Outside of your school, of course, and you won't have any issues. The drone is reasonably small, 98 by 92 by 41 millimeters. Think about the size of a small dinner plate. If I hold my hand up, it's about the size of my hand. And the propeller is about 3 inches. That's useful to know because that is the only part of the drone that we have to consider with respect to our safety concerns. This drone, these propellers that I'm going to detach, are made of a soft bendable plastic. What does that mean? That means that if one of your students were to be struck by the drone, the worst you could expect is a small nick that might draw a little bit of blood, maybe. Usually it does not, just causes a little ouch. And they're your only consumable. That means that when you crash your drone, yes, when you crash your drone, because all drone pilots crash their drone. When you crash your drone, the drone propeller is the only thing that will be consumed. They'll chip, they'll crack, they'll break, which is not a big deal at all because there are also spare drones inside of your packaging, spare propellers, I should say, spare propellers inside of your packaging. Those spare propellers are really easy to attach to your drone. And if you burn through your spare propellers, replacements for those propellers are just a couple of dollars. Got some questions coming about the drone. Can you only fly the drone with a phone or app? Is there a controller? At our school, students are not allowed to have their phones out. Backs, pats, yes, desks, no. There is a question there about ways in which we can actually use the drone. The answer is that if you have a drone, it is possible to purchase a third-party controller that will make sure that the drone can be flown with a physical controller. That's something that we don't offer in our equipment, but we can absolutely talk to you one-on-one and give you some more guidance around that. Really good question. We haven't actually gotten that question a whole lot, so we definitely appreciate you for asking that. Back to the drone's capabilities a little bit. There are sensors on the drone. The sensors become really useful. We'll talk more about those. Laser rangefinder, this is a time of flight sensor. Barometer, LED light system on the drone. There is, of course, a camera. And the drone connects to devices via Wi-Fi. That third-party controller would also create a Wi-Fi network to connect to your drone. And the drone charges via micro USB, even though I should add that the drones we provide have quick charging stations and extra batteries as well. Oh, and Dorian, you just added some context there. You have iPads. Your iPads will work with the drone really, really well. So Android or iOS, your iPads are perfect for what you want to do with the drones. Okay. Now, when we think about using the drones as scientific tools, we're really thinking about ways in which the drones are able to collect information. This really gets at to the meat of what we can do with our drone. And the way that we use our drone is through our sensors. The analogy that I like to use a lot is that our sensors are kind of like our sense is. That means that the drone is able to sense things outside of itself. And if human beings, if people were drones, were flying robots, which is kind of what a drone is, if people were drones, you have sensors as well. You have eyes that take in light information. Your skin, your sense of touch takes in information about pressure and heat. Your tongue and your nose take in sensitive information when it comes to the chemical makeup of objects, whether something is salty or sweet, whether something smells burned, things that we have to process and learn over time. And just like you have sensors, things that let you know about the world around you, our drone has sensors. Things like a camera, a thermometer, a laser, and a rangefinder as well. Now, the really useful thing about using our drone and using the sensors on our drone is that as we're controlling our drone and flying our drone, we'll see in this presentation, there's actually our integrated coding environment. This is the place where we drag and drop our block code to form instructions, but we also have what's called our flight data display. Clicking on that flight data display gives us a lot of the information about what our drone is physically doing in the world around it. I mentioned before that our drone has a gyroscope, an accelerometer, a thermometer, and we can get live readouts of what the drone is doing with a simple click on the side. So what we see in this video will kind of queue up and start running. Is I recorded actually a flight a little bit earlier, and we can see that the drone, as it's connected to the application, is feeding in live information about pitch, how much the drone is tilted forward and backward, roll, which is how much the drone is tilted to the left and the right, yaw, which is the rotation of the drone. It also has a gyroscope and an accelerometer. Those are sensors that coincidentally are on your phone. That accelerometer lets you know how fast the drone is moving in any particular direction. And you can tell that my drone is starting to heat up a little bit. It's reading a minimum temperature of 80 degrees or a maximum temperature of 82 degrees. And then at this point, the drone is flying 117 centimeters in the air. Really useful information for us to be able to record, and we can use that information, how quickly the drone is moving, if it's flying outside, how quickly the drone uh, or the drone's actual attitude as it's flying outside. The outward temperature, the altitude, the barometric pressure, those are things that allow us to get some information that we can plug in to scientific experiments. So we got information that the drone is able to take in, but we also, that it's just sensory information and attitude information, how the drone is moving through space, where the drone is located. Our drone also has a really useful sensor on the front of it when we think about its camera. So this is actual footage that we're able to record using this Hello drone. As you can see, it's decent. It's not great, right? What's the verdict on it? It won't ever be as good as a big drone, but in really good conditions. If you get in some software to allow you to edit the colors of the drone video after the fact, it will do a really good job of taking decent pictures. Okay. So that's kind of the big overview of the drone and the sensors and how we're able to use it. This idea that our drone is a flying robot that collects information, and we can use that information to help us as we're teaching the scientific method. So let's talk more about the tools of this drone and the scientific method. And to do that, of course, we want to talk about the scientific method. This is the chance for us to do a really quick refresher. Some of us have this scientific method burned into our brains. Most of us do. We've been learning and practicing and teaching the scientific method since we were young children ourselves. The scientific method, there are a bunch of different processes. The steps are pretty well codified and they vary. Some people use a 5-step process. Some people use an 8 or even an 11-step process. But the most common is the 7-step process. So as a quick refresher, we make an observation. You can't study what you don't know is there. Making that observation, the ability to look out in the world or use some kind of instrument to see a phenomena, is really important. That is the basis of science, is to study why things happen in the world around us. And when we see something happening, we form some kind of question. Why is it happening? What's happening? Is what is happening only here, or is it happening someplace else as well? From there, we do some background research. This is a chance for us to engage in a larger body of science and a larger space in the way in which people have worked together to learn about what's happening in the world around us. And at that point, we want to then form a hypothesis. We make our best educated guess around what's happening. There's lots of different ways we can approach forming that hypothesis. It's a combination of what we see and the research that we've conducted from the work of other scientists. But we want to say is we want to attribute some kind of action, some kind of causation to what we're witnessing from that phenomena. From there, and this is where students get really excited when it comes to the scientific method, is we conduct an experiment. We try to either observe this phenomena again and see if we can replicate it. We try to actually replicate the phenomena ourselves in a controlled situation. It is the chance for us to see if we can build some correlation between a cause and effect and say, okay, this is the thing that's happening. And in order to do that, we have to analyze our results and draw a conclusion. As we explore this phenomena, we're going to learn either this thing is happening or this thing is not happening according to what I hypothesized. I'm crunching my numbers, I'm looking at the data that I've collected. And then um, that's all fine and good. All this work has been done, but it doesn't become very useful if I'm not very good at communicating and letting people know what I've learned. My peers who are studying science, my instructors, you, my teachers, because we're getting assessed, of course, on my ability to learn this. And as we grow and become more and better scientists, it's going to become important for our students to be able to communicate this to citizens, to leaders of industry, to corporate partners, to lawmakers, to lobbyists. The importance of being able to communicate science and our findings is now extremely paramount and will only become more and more important. So there's an overarching question. This is an opportunity for me to be silent for a little bit and let it chew on us. What are some ways that the drone can become a tool? We know our drone has sensors, machines basically, that will allow the drone to learn and record data about what's happening in the world around it. We know that the scientific method tells us that we want to make an observation and we want to ask a question about a phenomenon in the real world. So I'm going to encourage you to use your imagination. What are some ways that the drone can become a tool in which to engage the scientific method? And I'll shut up for maybe a minute or two as we're brainstorming, as our fingers are going, and as our minds are going. So I'd love for us to jump in the chat, so in the Q&A, and share some ways that you can imagine drones becoming useful tools for science. Okay, we got some answers coming in. I'm gonna wait for a couple more answers to come in, and we'll talk about it. Interesting. Wait for another one, because this is good stuff already. We've got a couple of really good ideas that have already popped up in our comments. Doreen says that she would use the drone to take measurements. That's a really, really great idea. The amazing thing about our drone sensors, the accelerometer and the actual time of flight sensor, is that it allows us to work on the back end to do a little bit of math. If I'm using my code to be able to fly the drone, and I'm using code to tell the drone how far it should fly, that is a function of mathematics. If I know and I can combine information about the accelerometer and the time of flight, I can calculate how far I've actually gone. So there's this really cool mathematical opportunity that we can dig into with our students as they are flying their drones. Really fun because it's thinking about the way in which we take measurements and calculate distances in a different way. Really love that thought. Francesca says she wants to make observations of the school grounds, and this is also a really, really cool thing to do with our students. Generally speaking, our students only get to see our schools from certain perspectives. In fact, most of us only get to see our schools from certain perspectives. That is a function of the school's design, right? We come to the school ground. If we're in a particular campus, we walk through doors. There may or may not be some layers of security involved with that. And then the school is designed to, generally speaking, move students from point A to point B to point C, etc. throughout the day. Our different classes, restroom areas, dining areas, recreation and physical education areas, and so forth and so on. What perspectives of the school don't we get to see? We never get to see our school from above. We don't know what the roof looks like or why that might be necessary to know. We don't generally get a chance to see the way traffic moves around our school during the course of the day. We don't get to see the way birds migrate around the school during the course of the day, or even something as simple as thinking about the ways in which we can investigate and observe things like the plants around our school, and insects that are pollinating the plants around the school. It's kind of difficult, and we know that animal life, pollinators act differently when there are massive amounts of kids running around the plants that they're gathering pollen from. That changes behavior. And maybe a drone becomes a little bit less invasive, a way for us to see those pollinators in action throughout the course of the day. So observing school grounds, observing all the different ecosystems and different human interactions that we have with the physical space becomes a useful thing that we can do. Those are really, really great suggestions. Thank you so much for sharing them. You guys are giving me new ideas for curricula already. So I'm deeply appreciative for that from you all. Thank you so much for sharing. So when we think about what the drone can do, the amazing thing about scientific inquiry and observation is that we are kind of existing in this gray area when it comes to the way in which we want to use inquiry and observation. Um, At NextWaveSTEM, we know that the scientific method is something that's taught traditionally and is still assessed in some really robust ways, but we become more and more fans of project-based learning when we think about teaching our students and assessing our students' ability to form real investigations, to engage in investigative practices. And at the beginning of that, of both the scientific method and the project-based learning, it's this idea of making initial observation, seeing a phenomena in action, and by seeing that phenomena in action, we form a driving question. We form this big question that's really important for us to answer. And the amazing thing about both the scientific method and about project-based learning is that those questions are questions that can be formed in a really intentional, really meaningful context. And that context can be in the communities in which we live, whether those communities are local, state, national, or international. I appreciate, I can't say love, but I appreciate how many of our students want to study volcanoes, want to talk about the way that pressure will build up in the layers of the earth, how that pressure is going to force itself out, and how that pressure forms changes in the way that our earth has formed over time. That's a really, really important phenomena to learn about. What I will say about volcanoes is that unless you are a resident of Hawaii, if you are a United States student, the community in which you live very, very likely does not have a volcano that is going to really affect your local topography, your landscape, your planning, in your day-to-day life. In fact, many US students may never even visit a volcano. I know that it's been many years since I've been anywhere close to a volcano. The context there is important to know, but isn't necessarily relevant to our students if they don't live in those spaces. So it becomes important for us then to think about what context, what scientific phenomena can our students observe that will really have impacts on them. That's why we talk about those driving questions that are pulled from the headlines or that we talk about in our living rooms. So things that we should consider when we think about a driving problem or phenomena. What's something what's a problem that we might be trying to solve, or an observation that we've made that currently exists around us? Not necessarily something from the past, even though that's something important to consider. What's happening right now? If we're seeing a difference in the ways in which pollinators behave between last year and this year, that's a current problem that we want to investigate. If we've seen a significant difference in the level of lead in our water, or God forbid, the number of students who are suffering effects from those lead pipes and the lead coming into our water. That's something we might want to investigate right now. And it doesn't have to be a professional who does that work. We see citizen scientists doing that work all the time. So we are thinking about the observations, things that we can see, and ask some really good questions about right now around us. What I have highlighted here is thinking about the available tools for us to use. This drone becomes a really useful tool for changing our perspective and taking in data. We are still seeing really robust challenges when we think about climate change. It's kind of hard for us to chew gum and walk at the same time sometimes. Before we had a global pandemic, we had a bunch of different really robust challenges that our nation and our world is facing. And a lot of that was climate related and even weather related. Our drone becomes a really powerful tool for investigating that as well. And then finally, we think about how can we ensure that the problem or the problem that's associated with this observation that we might want to find a solution for or explain, create some kind of causal relationship with, is a real observation, a real solution to that problem, is a real correlation. How can we make sure that what we're looking for is actually meaningful, is good data, allows us to know what we're talking about when it comes to scientific inquiry. I know that's kind of a very fuzzy way to put that, but that's really what it comes down to, is can we say confidently that what we've observed we can actually explain? Creating context, selecting the driving question and the observations around us really brings that home for our students. And once that initial work is done, I like to contrast the scientific method to project-based learning here again. It's where we actually get into this student-led work where we as educators start giving that feedback. If they've identified this new change that they've seen, if the pollinators around their school are actually acting differently, and they're going to use their drone to investigate that, there's all kinds of work that needs to be done in order to build our students to their level. They need to know how to operate this drone safely. They will need to decide whether they're going to manually fly the drone or if they're going to write programs that allow the drone to make the movements and take the pictures that they want the drones to take, and then record that data later on. And then there becomes this feedback loop where you as a teacher benchmark that work and guide them to the next step, whether it's refining the code or thinking about the observation or thinking about their methods. And then you're reflecting. There's the assessment point, and then they're back into their student work. PBL aligns with the actual scientific method in that way. We're not just setting our students up once and then say, go do the science fair, do the project. We are continuously checking in with them and allowing them to make some smart decisions about where they're going to go next. So lots of information here about what our drone can do and how we can use it in science. There's also this big question now of how we can be equitable. We know that not everyone has the same access to the resources, and that's a problem in and of itself. That's another problem that we believe we at NextWaveSTEM can help solve. and that our students are going to continue to employ technology, new technologies, some older technologies, to help solve those problems. How can we bring some more equity into learning about drones? Well, first, it's thinking about block-based coding. Block-based coding is a game changer when it comes to equity in learning computer science. First off, it's free and it's accessible. We use a block-based coding program here at NextWaveSTEM in order to teach and even fly our drones. You can fly this drone manually, that's not a problem at all, but we use block-based coding in our drone because it's important for us to use this drone to continue to teach emerging technologies, not just the physical drone itself, but the software principles underneath that allow our drone to be used really successfully. In the future, that is right now, where we see objects being delivered by a drone, those drones are not being flown manually. There are robust computer algorithms flying those drones autonomously to their application. That is something that our students are able to learn for free using these apps. And that's with or without the drone. That becomes really, really important. Got a really good question here from Doreen. Do they simulate a drone flying like in a game? Yes, they do. What they do, what you kind of see in the picture here, we're not showing it today just for a little bit of a lack of time. But what you see here is a set of instructions. So it's an actual program that uses blocks of code. They don't have to type any of this stuff out. The only thing they have to type out is the actual numbers in this code. But you drop in these blocks of code, they interact with each other, they snap together. And then when you tap that tap to start button, the drone takes off and flies on your screen. That's the simulation. So you're not even worried about connecting to the drone. We can see the drone and how the drone will react in real life, reacting on our screen. And it does kind of look game-like. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, we can simulate. But it's really, really cool because we're able to build in our math, science, and engineering concepts, and they become practicable. So where we're comparing what we want our drones to do with what it's actually doing in our simulation, we can see those things over and over again in the app and in the simulation. This is all being done in the Tello EDU app. So the same app we showed and that you can refer to when we send out this slide deck, and the same app that we use in our curricula to code and teach our students about drones is what they use to simulate as well. So the really beautiful thing about block-based coding and coding with the app to create equity is that we're able to build scenarios. We're actually able to build situations that our students will need to practice and actually engage logical thinking and mathematical thinking in order to solve. An example of this is, in this case, we are teaching some foundational skills that we see in next generation science standards. There are foundational practices in next generation science standards, but also in the Common Core math standards. And two of those practices that are really fundamental are looking for and making use of structure. That becomes absolutely important. Yes, absolutely, like constraints. And the structure is inherent in the way that we code, and even if we're using certain blocks and repetition to complete certain tasks, we are able to engage that. But we're also in a situation where we want to teach our students how to construct viable arguments and then critique the reasoning of others. Are they able to explain why they're choosing the code blocks they're choosing? And are they able to look at the code blocks of others and say, okay, what's going on here? An activity that will really illustrate this is what I like to call front yard cartography. And in this activity, students will need to program a flight for the drone to effectively map the area of their front yard. In this case, students would have a constraint. only 10 blocks that will be available to complete the task. And during, you're right on it. Otherwise, they'll have way too many steps. What can they build in order to complete the task? And they don't necessarily need the physical drone to be able to do this. We can empower them with some tools remotely. What are their constraint factors? Well, we know that there's a limited amount of blocks that they can use, but there's also, what does their front yard look like? Things like Google Maps, using a compass, using a measuring tape, or if they do have a physical device, or even if they can estimate the area of their front yard or of their park, or just up and down the block. These digital tools become things that they can apply and code with and consider using their drones even at distance. So we can use the combination of simulation, digital tools, and kind of going out in the space that they do have, depending on the task, of course, to actually build in these remote learning options. And all of this can be done without their actual physical drone. That's something that we empower through our curricula. The curricula that we license to schools, which is a combination of our training and our remote learning courses as well. So there are a bunch of different ways that we want to make sure that our students are able to access the drone and pull in some learning. So I know I just said a lot. Kind of hit you with the fire hose, thinking about our physical drone and what it does and how it can be used. Talking about this emerging technology and its use in science, and really getting good ideas from you about the way that we would engage our drone for scientific use. And then going even a step further about making the drone accessible to more and more students. But now we want to talk a little bit about the specific ways in which NextWaveSTEM can help you bring drones to your students. And for that, I'm actually going to turn it over to my colleague, Segundi. She's going to share a little bit of more information for you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Des. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we got you.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Really nice to have everyone here, seeing a lot of familiar faces again. So good to see everyone back. So there's a bunch of stuff that we've been doing here at NextWaveSTEM. The first is this thing that you're attending, which is our webinars, our professional development sessions. Des has been leading a ton of them over the past few months, and we are kind of rounding up on our last few remaining. So please make sure to check out our last few remaining, and hopefully we can see you there. And this will continue to be offered through this week. Des, if you can go to the next slide for me. And then a couple of other things that we're doing, which is getting things in front of students. So part of the work that we've been doing the past couple months is making sure that our curricula is applicable and effective for students as they learn from home. So for students who have access to internet and a laptop, we have our hands-on experience. So this is, or I'm sorry, we have our online experience. So this is where students will have a chance to, play around with Tinkercad, play around with Telo-edu, just like Des was showing you, and they don't actually need any sort of specialized equipment. They don't need the drones on them. They don't need a 3D printer. They can still get all the benefits out of having this in front of them and be able to work on the scientific method, the design phase, all the things that come before you actually touch any sort of specialized equipment. For students that are able to access STEM kits, we do have a hands-on experience. So for this, families will purchase the kit. So they'll purchase a drone, a robot, a 3D printer. And so then we have curriculum that's designed to fit with that. So the end product is that they'll get to, manipulate these different objects that they have in hand, or they'll be printing many things and conducting the scientific method based on that as well. For both of these things, you can feel free to email me. I'm happy to give you more information. We also have summer camp style classes going on. So Monday through Friday, kind of 5 intense courses throughout the week. And we can also customize your scheduling for you based on what you're looking for. If it's once a week, twice a week, anything like that. So hopefully we can work with some of you soon. Thank you, Des.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Segundi, for sharing more about that. And we also, of course, like I said before, we are one-stop shop. We want to make sure that what you need for the fall with regards to STEM learning, if that's curricula, so that you can teach emerging technologies, robotics, drones, 3D printing, computers, and AI, and curricula that you can use both for in-person traditional learning, but is adaptable for remote learning. That's something we want to make sure that you have access to. So because each of you is with us today live, there is a package deal. You can reach out to Segundi and she can let you know more about that discounted price for our all-in-one solution. So I said a whole lot. Hopefully some of it was useful, but I want to give us an opportunity because there was that fire hose of information and I did a decent job of giving us some time at the end for your questions. If you've got questions about the scientific method or about our actual physical drone or the software, or if you have questions about NextWave STEM and what we can offer you, this is your time to ask. I'm going to pause and let you throw those questions in there and we'll take them live on air. And there's no such thing as a bad question. Almost no such thing as a bad question. Okay. Well, it seems that all hearts and minds are clear so far. I think there may be maybe a few fingers going on the back end, and if some questions come in the next few moments, that is fine. But in the event that you have questions, if you're ruminating over the webinar today, or if you have the opportunity to look over the slide deck or the recording, and you want to get into the weeds a little bit more on the curricula, or what we do in NextWave STEM or about the scientific method, we would love to get in contact with you. That is my email address. I'm desmond@nextwavestem.com. We keep it pretty simple, as simple as we can. And our handles to find us on social media are also really simple. We are at NextWaveSTEM. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook. We're not on TikTok, and we might not ever make it. We may need to find an intern that's going to help us out with that because I'm not the TikTok guy. But every place else that you can find NextWave STEM, we're there, and we would love to engage you. Absolutely explore more with us or on your own, but NextWave STEM will be here to support you. And before I let you go, just want to let you know that our next webinar is going to be Thursday at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock Eastern time. It's 3D printing, planning your production process. One thing for those of us who are interested in 3D printing, if we've never done it before or done it a little bit, we learn really quickly is that it's an engaged process. Where we're preparing and we're designing, but then we're printing, and then we have to think, okay, how can I actually print and make this fun for my students? How am I not going to bore them? How are they going to get a chance to get what they're printing and actually interact with it? How can I make sure I'm managing my time effectively? We'll talk about that on Thursday. So if you've got questions about 3D printing generally, or if you have questions about how to take your 3D printing courses to the next level, we're there to help you then. Until we see you on that webinar on Thursday, we're hoping that everyone is staying safe, that everyone is staying sane, and that you're still really excited to teach. We are here at NextWave STEM, and we're so excited to support you. Until we see you again, have a great day, and we'll be talking to you soon. Bye-bye now.